Hello and welcome to what I think is episode 35 of Not Another Nutrition Podcast. Continuing with the creatine series. This episode is kind of part B from last episode. I had to split it. It was originally going to be, my thought was around concerns, misconceptions, common questions around and touching on the bigger topics. I still think I'm going to do a listener questions one, which is just going to be like quick fire, answer specific questions. Some of them I'll literally be like, yes, full stop, next question. No, full stop, next question. But this one, or ended up these two, on some of the bigger topics. So today I'm going to cover hair loss and just touch on skin/acne. I'm going to cover gut function, gastrointestinal distress, because that came up a lot. And then just have a bit of a discussion around pregnancy, breastfeeding, and children. So really, really quick, I cannot tell you how many questions came in around this whole hair loss thing. Does creatine make you bald? Does creatine cause you to lose your hair? So many people asking that question, I guess for the fear of taking it and it impacting their hair. And I think what I'll say here is, I think I've got a podcast somewhere on hair loss and talk about some of the mechanisms of action around this. And a key player seems to be something called DHT. Dihydrotestosterone, I think. And it's a very active version of testosterone that has certain effects, one of which being if you are susceptible to hair loss, like I am, it's one of the mechanisms by which you will lose your hair. And to some extent, if it's going to happen to you, it's inevitable. Now, obviously, there's different ways of thinking about this. As a male, kind of like, yep, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Embrace it, go with it. And don't worry too much. If you want to be, playing football or rugby or weight training really, really well, and creatine is going to help you do that, and you're going to be playing one of those sports for the rest of your life or whatever, don't worry too much. Like, creatine is not going to suddenly make your hair start falling out like crazy. I think I'll lead with that comment. It's just not like that. So I think I might have commented on the fact that, you do need this predisposition. When people take steroids, their DHT will increase. And therefore, if someone is susceptible to hair loss, it will make their hair fall out quicker, faster, whatever, earlier, etc. And it will, it can do that to women. Because steroids are, and at the doses that bodybuilders would use, it's going to have profound effects on the body. These are supraphysiological levels that are being hit. But even then, I discussed the fact that you still see pro bodybuilders with boatloads of hair on their head. Obviously, it causes more hair growth elsewhere on the body, but it's kind of unfortunate. In some ways, that you then lose it off your head. So creatine is a natural supplement, and there is one study ever with no... So one thing I will say is there are several studies that have all looked at creatine supplementation, and the idea was, well, it's increasing muscle mass. Is it increasing our testosterone levels? And seemingly the body evidence does not support that. That is not really how it's having its effect. However, we have this one study in rugby players that did measure DHT levels, and they increased a little bit. No study ever has looked at creatine and hair loss as an endpoint. So, at best, things are very, very preliminary. If it's not increasing testosterone, then it's hard to believe that it's going to be increasing DHT significantly. And countless people. We never want to use anecdotes. The plural of anecdote is not data, in terms of we're not getting, you don't get 100 people and go, oh, this is the answer. But people almost talk about creatine like it's going to cause hair loss. So therefore, anyone who, it's a bit like when people go, gluten's killing people, gluten's causing X, Y, Z. And then you look at the population and how many billions of people are consuming gluten, and it's not doing that to all of them. So there's obviously something wrong with that thinking. So likewise with creatine, it's not leading to people's hair falling out. Now, the only thing I will say here is, if you're feeling like that's you, if you're feeling like you're super susceptible to hair loss, and when you take creatine, like I was someone who naturally started losing my hair from a fairly young age, started receding very early, started thinning very early. And when I took creatine or didn't take creatine, I noticed absolutely no difference either way in what was happening. So I'm someone who's susceptible. So when people say to me, I took creatine, my hair just felt a bit, a bit thinner, a bit whatever, a bit weaker, I don't know. I am skeptical, I'll be honest, because it surprises me that they would notice, because even if it did have an effect, it's a very, very, very small one. So I do think it's mostly in people's head. Anyway, I'll link you in the show notes, as always, martin-mcdonald.com/EP35. I hope I'm getting the episodes right, I tell you. To that study in a small group of rugby players whose DHT levels increase. It's not an interesting read. It's pointless. It doesn't add much to the discussion, but it's there for you. And that's really the end of it. So the second side is this idea of, does it worsen skin? Does it give you acne? Does it whatever? Again, it is very, very unlikely. There doesn't seem to be any mechanism by which this would be the case. And sometimes people's entire routine changes when they start taking creatine, as in they start going to the gym, they start eating more protein, they start bulking, eating more calories. There's other factors. Things like eating high GI carbohydrates is this overarching term of like there's more evidence for eating high GI carbohydrates, which I hate the term high GI carbohydrates. I'm using that term because it's what people in this area use to discuss it, but I really, really dislike it, because when you talk about high GI carbohydrates, you're talking about things like ultra-processed foods, refined grains, but also carrots. And so the idea that carrots would be giving people, increase IGF-1 and increase sebum production and oily skin and therefore leading to acne doesn't sit well with me. But we do know that changing your diet and eating a better diet overall, what we understand to be a better diet, can improve skin condition. So anyway, stuff like that versus creatine, much bigger impact. We know that there's a teeny tiny link for some people with dairy and acne, but yet, your overall diet quality, unprocessed versus whole, processed versus unprocessed foods playing a bigger role, and creatine being nowhere to be seen. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that much more. There aren't many studies in these areas, unfortunately, but the mechanisms don't seem to be there. So my advice is, don't worry too much. But if you personally feel a certain way, then it's up to you to have the discussion with yourself in terms of what is more important to you, the benefits of creatine supplementation, which you've learned about on this podcast, or the possibility that what you're observing is real. There you go. The other big one is GI distress, so gastrointestinal distress, and people getting upset stomachs, people getting a funny tummy, some people feeling like it gives them diarrhea. It is an anecdote, an early anecdote that came about, and it has been studied. And it's rare, but it's, and like big longitudinal studies. I've just suddenly thought of a random study. It's a kind of a bit of a throwaway study because it didn't really find anything. But they were using quite, I'm trying to think of the methods. It was in ALS. So it was part of like the kind of studies around the neuroprotective effect of creatine. But they used creatine every day, I think at quite a high dose. And I don't like the way they do this. Just this single absolute dose of 10 grams. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about now. This is why this study's popped into my head. And it's annoying because I don't know the study well at all, because it is just a throwaway study. They didn't find any benefits for ALS, I don't think. And I can't remember if they did different doses, but what they did find is some people went out the study, just a very, very, very few subjects. Oh yeah, that was it. There was a couple of studies on ALS, and essentially one of them was looking at they were kind of done in tandem, I think, and it was long. It was like 300 plus days long of supplementation at about 10 grams per day, and they might have done a 2 times 5 grams and one at 10 grams. I don't know 100% about that. I've got another study that I'll just link you to that's similar, talking about GI distress and these dosages. But it does annoy me because 10 grams to one person is very different. You know, a 50 kilo individual and a 100 kilo individual both taking 10 grams of creatine is a very different amount relative to their body weight. And this is why I'm always talking about protein intake relative to your body weight, creatine supplementation relative to your body weight. So next episode is your dosing one, how you should dose it, how you should take it, specifics around then, when and why, etc. And we'll talk about those relative doses. But yeah, one of the arms of this study was, or one of these studies was, essentially any side effects, and again, longitudinal, a year long, no detrimental effects to like kidney function. And so they did report like the 3 out of the whole study individuals, seemed to get diarrhea when they were using that amount. And then I think in that study, that's when they split into 2 times 5 grams, and these individuals were okay. But it was interesting because they measured lots of different aspects of health, biomarkers of function, and showed no ill effects. So, anyway, yeah, my point being is, look, I do get the occasional messages. Creatine's hurting my tummy. Giving me an upset stomach, whatever. How much are you taking? And how much do you weigh? I'm a 60 kilo female. Right, how much are you taking? Well, I just take a scoop. How much is a scoop? I don't know. Okay, well, weigh it. Right, it's 8 grams. Right, that's a big dose. That is a large dose of creatine for someone at your body weight. It's 3 or more times the daily maintenance dose for your body weight. So stop it and take a smaller dose. But I understand companies just say 1 scoop. Companies say take 5 grams because that's there or thereabouts. But we know that the relative doses are much smaller. So anyway, I would say if it is, so in one of these studies, have I got anything? No. People saying, does it impact gut microbiome? I don't know. I've not seen data. That was one of the, I've got these questions written down here. Don't really know. It's not something that's been well studied yet. But sorry, just on the GI distress, take a smaller amount more often. So even if you're wanting to take 10 grams a day to load quickly, take 5 times 2 grams or 3 times 3.3 grams or whatever. And you just might find you're able to take it with no ill effects. Okay. And another thing I'll just say, which is just kind of interesting again, creatine's just amazing in terms of all of these different effects it seems to have and in the body. And again, this whole idea of gut microbiome and gut health. And, I think it's too early to start having major discussions. But one thing I was saying to Toby, one of my staff, about this was I had an Olympic athlete, a Paralympic athlete who had Crohn's, and we were supplementing with him with creatine. Little did we know, there's a medical case study out there, which is a bizarre study, and it really annoys me. Did I mention this in the last episode about these researchers, doctors, whoever, writing 12 milligrams of creatine when they meant 12 grams. And it just annoys me that that's getting through peer review when anyone should be able to look at that and go, well, that's a ridiculous. It's obviously not 12 milligrams. No one's ever only taken 12 milligrams of creatine. Again, for the uninitiated in the realm, fine, you wouldn't know. But for someone who's doing research or publishing stuff on this, they should really be spotting that very easily. And in this study, they talk about this medical case study, so it's just one subject, but him taking 1,034 grams of creatine. And I was like, what? And I thought, is it a decimal place? But then I was like, 1.034, that's a bizarre amount of creatine. Anyway, I don't really get it. I feel like maybe they've reported the volume of water plus creatine that it was consuming. Who on earth knows? Anyway, just some really interesting stuff that in models of colitis, and I think this medical case study he had, I think it was Crohn's, yeah. But linking it to like gut barrier function and the mucosal membrane recovery in this individual seemed to be better with creatine supplementation. And again, it's early days. There's nothing major being published in this area. But again, just for me, it's like, it does just make me think. With all of the safety data we have in adults and creatine supplementation, just flip and take it. Why not? Just do it. All of the preliminary stuff there is in Huntington's and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and cognitive function in the elderly and benefiting you for your exercise and helping with your sleep deprivation. Like, my goodness, how cool would it be to be the person who discovered it? Right. I'll leave that there. Final little thing is pregnancy, children, breastfeeding. And I was tentative. Stretch before we go into this. Tentative to talk too much about this, but I wanted to have this section where if you're a nutritionist or a dietitian or a doctor or a personal trainer who wanted to give your patient or client some information, they're asking you these questions, for them to make an informed decision. I am not giving advice on what you should do. I'm giving information. You can send them to here to give them that information that you may not know for them to make a decision. It's a tricky one because we do not, I'll start with pregnancy. We'll kind of go through the life cycle, pregnancy, breastfeeding, child. That's how it works if you're not aware. And I did actually have someone message me about conception. Not like that, but it was about, would creatine help the environment to grow a healthy baby? And I said, honestly, we're miles away from knowing anything like that. Don't get, it's like, creatine's amazing, it must help with this. But anyway, so during pregnancy, there has been discussion around creatine being a third trimester supplement alongside other things that have been used to potentially undermine some of the complications of pregnancy that we often see. Now, I just want to say this. My feeling, creatine is often measured in the blood and urine of pregnant women. And so if you're taking something that changes those values, I just worry that the medical establishment isn't ready for you. And obviously I am aware of many women who have taken creatine and they've been training and everything whilst pregnant. All of the athletes ever who have got pregnant, they are often taking creatine. And there's no reason to believe it would be a major issue because of all of the health data that we've got on creatine, it not causing issues. Now, there is a big change in water levels in pregnancy. There is a big increase in blood volume. And therefore, I would just be tentative, especially if someone was going to do it, I would tell them to be moderate in their dosing. So do not load, for instance. Just go with the kind of long-term maintenance type level of creatine supplementation so that there aren't big shifts. That would be my first thing if someone is going to use it. The thing to say is I could come out here and say, don't do it. What's the point? What's worth the risk? But there is also some very small potential benefits. And these things are being discussed. It is being used. Creatine's being studied or has been studied as this like third trimester supplement in terms of in situations of, let me think. Premature babies, but that's post-birth. It has been used. That's quite interesting. It didn't actually show any benefit, but I will just say that out loud, is doctors have deemed it okay to give creatine supplementation to premature babies to try and help them. It's something called, it's like AOP, apnea of prematurity or something. I don't know. Anyway, this isn't my expert area. Don't test me. But it didn't help in the study that I read. And but there was no deleterious effect to the premature baby. So that's one thing. They deemed it okay to do. This is annoying, third trimester, ischemic post-ischemic recovery of protein synthesis. I'm just thinking about things I've read in studies. Man, there are situations, essentially the placenta is a like high energy turnover area within the body, and there's this idea that babies might become creatine deficient. They're not able to process enough, and there's these different situations. So it's almost like a bit like folic acid supplementation. It's like, oh, why do you have to give supplements? Well, actually, there's super good, strong evidence that we are reducing neural tube defects by supplementing folic acid during pregnancy and even before conception, to kind of have a good environment for starting the growth of a baby. So anyway, the one thing I will mention is preeclampsia is a very common issue. No, I don't know if very common is a good thing to say, actually. It is an issue that we sometimes see in pregnancy, and it's essentially due to this increase in blood volume, shifts in water, and you get this high blood pressure. And the good thing is about when there's good medical systems in place, these women get supported well and they get good testing. And the creatinine clearance value, I believe it's called, gets measured. And obviously when you're taking creatine, you then get these changes. And therefore, it would be important to, if you're taking creatine, to mention that you're taking creatine because it might change the values. So you kind of see why I was tentative to talk about this, because there's so much at play. But if you're an otherwise healthy individual, I see no reason why taking a a moderate dose of creatine would be of any harm. It's not advice. I would also say, if you are a practitioner, that's why I want to provide this podcast where I'm not giving advice, I'm just giving information. But if you are working one-on-one with a client, you have a duty of care, and you start going, yeah, it's probably all right for you to do it, and something goes wrong, even if it's not related, people unfortunately feel the need to find blame somewhere, and they'll look for something that they can see and measure and put their finger on. Even if it's something completely unrelated, they might change it to the most recent thing that they deem they changed, but they didn't realize that, drinking 5 double espressos every day during pregnancy might be an issue. But because they'd been doing that for a few weeks already, and then they started taking the creatine, it's the creatine's fault, for instance. Anyway, anything else to discuss? Breastfeeding. There isn't a large amount of creatine in breast milk. Again, there's no reason to believe that there would be a major issue with taking a moderate level of creatine whilst breastfeeding, when you get back into the gym or whatever, whilst breastfeeding your child. Again, we don't have the studies, but there isn't reasonable reason to believe that it would be causing big issues. So again, I'm not telling you you should, but I'm saying I don't see any major reason. And if anyone's listening to this and you're some kind of breastfeeding expert, like I've read a lot of research, I have come across nothing to suggest it. But if you are some sort of expert and you come across this podcast, please reach out to me. I have no skin in the game. I have no issue being wrong. When I get round to doing a breastfeeding specific podcast one day, there are goons out there teaching pre and postnatal courses to personal trainers, etc., just talking utter rubbish and not evidence-based, but just this is what we think. Nutritional therapists and teamed up with these gimpy personal trainer types. I am talking about someone specific now. And you're just teaching the incorrect stuff. So I go and post what the evidence says. And no, that's not right. This is what we think. Based on what? Based on what we've always done. And, I'm a woman and I've got breasts and you haven't, so I'm right and you're wrong. Cool. Good argument. That wasn't really their argument. They just said, this is what we teach and that's what it is. And we're level 3, whatever. We've got reps accreditation. Well done, you. Anyway, so breastfeeding. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about nutrition for breastfeeding, not creatine. But there is no reason. But yes, if someone is a real expert, reach out to me. That's where I was. And maybe I can get you on the podcast. That'd be cool. Unfortunately, I don't think you exist. So, magical human, you can stay in my dreams. Last but not least, children. I feel like I've mentioned this probably twice already, that, there's this brilliant evidence of creatine supplementation in children with traumatic brain injury and showing these unbelievable benefits. Like, I'm really quite astounded about how amazing the benefits that have been shown in those situations are. Do you need to supplement your child with creatine? Not really. If they're vegan or vegetarian, maybe taking a tiny amount based on their body weight might be beneficial. If they're eating some meat, great. I don't think everyone should be rushing out to supplement their kids with creatine necessarily. But when you start talking about 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, you see the size of some flipping 14-year-olds these days. They're men. They make me feel small. Then probably not going to have any issues taking creatine. Again, consider the reason for why. If they're eating plenty of calories, if they are active, if they're not doing a particular sport, it's not going to be a game changer. So don't worry too much. But if you're working with an athlete, a 14-year-old who's going to the Olympics when they're 16, maybe there's a strong argument that there's no obvious reason for any detriment to them, but there is an obvious gain for them as a human. So therefore not an issue. Right. Let me just see if I've answered all your questions. I think I have. Cool. I'll leave it there. I feel like I've done that one quite quickly. Not too many tangents. Some interesting stuff. Probably doesn't cause hair loss or acne. If you're getting GI distress, take smaller amounts more often. We had the pregnancy and breastfeeding discussion, and children is probably safe for. Until next time, much love. Thank you for all your reviews on iTunes. If you can do them anywhere else, do there too. Love you. Bye.